This is a real heat pump bringing Gulf air into the region, and it's very moist Gulf air. That's colliding with a major cold front that the steering currents are bringing down all the way from the Arctic. These are some very serious systems moving into our area.
All right, that's fine. Camera 2. Camera 1, let's tighten up the 2 shot a bit.
It means rain, it means high winds, possible thunderstorms. So, in combination with the new moon, I'd say our forecast over the next 12 hours is for a dark and stormy night. Back to you, Dennis.
So, get out your umbrellas.
Thanks, John. Now let's summarize today's top news stories. Police in Dedham today announced the arrest of Angela Potts, who they believe to be a major courier of drugs into New England, on drug possession charges. An airline stewardess, Miss Potts is believed to have brought the drugs in on her work flights. Police are also investigating her possible involvement with a drug distribution ring in the area. And our top story.
Yesterday, police in Dedham also discovered the body of Geraldine Tracy, who was stabbed to death in her rented home. The stabbing occurred Saturday night, and police are questioning her maid, Gladys Sharp, and a man described as her boyfriend, Henry Fisher. They're also looking for her husband, who hasn't been seen since the murder, and who's only known for now as Mr. Tracy. A busy day in Dedham.
That's all for the 6 o'clock news. But before we sign off, I just want to thank United Charities for having Beryl and myself as their hosts for the annual banquet Saturday night. We enjoyed it, and it was for a good cause.
It was. And a good time, too.
Right. So that's it for the early edition of the WDOA News. For Beryl Blackwood, I'm Dennis Oliver. We'll see you at 11.
Studio. Miss Blackwood, it's for you.
Hello, Beryl Blackwood. Oh, hello, Jim. What's that? You found what? Where? How do you know it came from a shop on Broad Street? Oh, I see. Well, you shouldn't be telling me this. You should be telling Redmond or Hemingway. Don't talk that way, please. Oh, all right, I'm sorry, but we'll talk later. Look, let me transfer you to Mr. Hemingway. Oh.
Hi. How about dinner after 11?
Sorry, Dennis, I can't. I already have plans with Jim.
Johnson? Beryl, be serious. Now, when are you going to break...
But we're still on for Saturday night, I hope.
Yeah, sure. But Beryl,
Good.
I just can't...
Well, this time we won't waste any time at some charity banquet. Just the two of us. Why don't you come over and I will fix you something very, very nice.
Okay.
All right, Johnson. That's a hell of a scoop. I can't believe you found the murder weapon. I want you to get on that train and get back here. I want you and that pin here in the studio live at 11. Okay, bye-bye. Oh, Redmond, listen to this. Johnson says he's found the weapon used to murder Geraldine Tracy.
Great. I thought we were going to have to lead at 11 with that dog show story. Where did he find it?
In the hollow of a tree, right next to her house. Now, because of the weather, the newscopter can't fly back here, so Johnson's taking a commuter train that arrives at South Station at 9:35. So we'll have him report live from the studio, okay?
Fine.
All right.
A hell of a piece of luck, us having Johnson working this drug story in Dedham even before the murder happened. And he's got a major scoop there with this dagger in the tree story. And I want to lead with it if he ever gets here. He was supposed to be on the 9:35 from Dedham. Call the station, see if his train is in yet.
I don't believe him. Do you?
It is pretty wacky, but if it jives with the autopsy, it's good enough for me. Hey, it's a great story.
What's this about a shop?
Yeah, on Bond Street. He claims it came from there. He's going to track it down tomorrow. And get a load of this. He says he's seen it before in the shop window.
Oh, come on. That is unbelievable.
Maybe. Let's just report it, okay, Dennis? Let's not let our professional or personal rivalries get in the way, all right?
Hey, look, don't worry about me. I'm a pro.
His train was on time. He should be here soon. But they said we should get a camera or reporter down there if we want a story. Because about a half an hour ago, a man was found stabbed to death in a phone booth.
This is incredible. This is incredible. All right, look. We've got 33 minutes to 11 to get a minicam down there to do a live remote. All right, Dennis, this may bump the Tracy story to number 2, if we can identify the body in time. All right, let's move. Camera 4, pedestal up. All right, pan right and go to a two-shot. Let's do this.
Good evening. I'm Dennis Oliver.
And I'm Beryl Blackwood.
Tonight's top story, WDOA reporter James Johnson was found just a few minutes ago, stabbed to death in a phone booth at South Station.
He was returning to Boston from Dedham, where earlier today he had discovered what he believed to be the weapon used in the murder of Geraldine Tracy. It's possible he was followed by the murderer and killed to suppress this information. Police are investigating.
So there you have it, 2 murders. None of us at WDOA was surprised by the murder of Geraldine Tracy. We deal in stories like that all the time. But it was shocking to have one of our own colleagues killed. Now we're investigating both murders, and you can too.
For the next half hour, you'll follow us as we investigate these murders and report on them. Anything a person tells us may or may not be true. Anything we tell one another may or may not be true. It's up to you to filter out the truth from the fiction.
But there's one type of evidence you can believe. At 8 points during the story, we'll discover evidence which is definitely true. When we discover it, you'll be instructed to pause the tape and flip a coin. Call heads red and tails blue. Then look at the side of the evidence card which matches the color. Keep track each time on your notepad of which color evidence you saw.
At the end of the game, compare the pattern of red and blue evidence you discovered with the patterns on the answer sheet. Then look in the answer book for the corresponding solution. That way you'll find out if you were able to discover who the murderer or murderers are.
Let's look at the first evidence now. Take out your coin and flip it. Then look at evidence card number 1. If the coin comes up heads, look at the red side. And if it's tails, look at the blue side. Don't look at both. And make a note on the notepad as to which you looked at.
Good. That's your first clue. Don't forget to mark down on the notepad whether you saw the red evidence or the blue evidence.
Now, we'll continue with the story. The murder of Geraldine Tracy occurred in her home in Dedham. WDOA News has learned that that's not all that occurred there. On the days when her husband was away earning a living as a traveling salesman, Mrs. Tracy was having a romance with a prominent jeweler in Dedham named Henry Fisher.
Fisher discovered the body and was the person who called the police to inform them of the murder. WDOA anchorman Dennis Oliver interviewed Fisher today at his store in Dedham, and he told us further details of the events of that evening.
Yes, I'm the one that discovered the body.
Police have placed the time of the murder at between 8 p.m. and midnight of that evening. What were you doing at that time?
Well, I can pinpoint the time better than that because I was having dinner at my home. I walked over to her house about 9:30. I think it took 20 or 30 minutes. We'd arranged that. That's when I found her.
Fisher said that to get over the shock, he then went and got his car and drove around. He arrived back at his store around midnight, and then he called the police from there.
Mr. Fisher, it's extremely likely that the person who killed Mrs. Tracy is the
I
same...
would prefer if you called her Geraldine, if you don't mind.
...is the same person who killed our reporter, Jim Johnson. Now, you've told us what you were doing Saturday night at the time Geraldine Tracy was killed. What were you doing Monday night at the time of Jim Johnson's death?
I have a very good alibi for Monday night. I was doing work right here in my office. My business partner and I are considering taking in a third partner, and he was coming down on Tuesday to meet with us, so I had to work late that evening to prepare some papers for the deal. I ordered my meal from the hotel next door. I do that pretty frequently. The waiter brought the food over about 6, picked up the dishes about 9, so I could have hardly been on the train to Boston if I was eating dinner and doing my work here.
Can you substantiate this story?
Ask the waiter. He saw me when he brought the food over, and I brought the dishes out and put them here in the store for him to pick up at 9, but I think he looked in and saw me then too. Ask him.
Henry Fisher was just one of at least 3 people who saw Geraldine Tracy on the day she was killed. Her husband, Mr. Tracy, stopped by earlier that evening, and neighbors said they heard them fighting. One even told me she thought about calling the police, but didn't. Mrs. Tracy's maid, Gladys Sharp, has also admitted to police that she was working in the home until late in the afternoon of that same day. We found Sharp at her home. Henry Fisher claims that he didn't kill Geraldine Tracy. Do you believe he's telling the truth?
Oh, Henry Fisher would never hurt her. He loved her. He's a wonderful man. If he told you that, you can believe him.
Neighbors said they heard her and her husband having a fight earlier that evening.
Husband?
Mr. Tracy? He was her husband.
Well, if you say so. But a man who says he's a traveling salesman and only shows up on weekends? Well, it's a pretty funny sort of husband, huh?
Sharp claims never to have met Mr. Tracy, and she says she can't identify him either.
I never did. But he must have been an executive or something, because every time he stayed over, I wasn't supposed to come to the house the next morning until after he'd left, which was usually around 10 o'clock.
Henry Fisher said that he was working late the night Jim Johnson was killed. Can you possibly confirm that?
Of course not.
Why? What were you doing?
I did what I always do. I rented a couple of tapes from the video store, and then I came home and watched them, and later that night I took them back to the store. I don't like talking to you.
We followed up the suggestion of Gladys Sharp that perhaps Geraldine Tracy wasn't married after all. We contacted her friend, Amy Manwaring, at her apartment.
I was her best friend. If she was married, don't you think I would have been invited to the wedding? To put it in a word, do I think she was married? No.
Dennis, what about this Mr. Tracy? Do the police have any clues as to where he might be or even who he might be?
At this time, Beryl, they don't. We can only wonder if they were married, and we may never know the answer to that question until the mysterious Mr. Tracy returns, if he ever does. But for now, WDOA looked into the alibis of Henry Fisher and Gladys Sharp for the night on which our reporter, James Johnson, was killed. And we were only able to verify one of them.
Dennis, didn't you report the night that Jim was killed that he said the dagger came from a shop on Bond Street?
Yeah, that's the information Redmond gave me. Johnson told Hemingway that on the phone.
He didn't say that when he was talking to me. He said Broad Street, a shop on Broad Street.
Well, maybe you misunderstood him.
No, I'm sure he said Broad Street.
Look, forget it.
No, I'm going to check into it. Redmond never gives me any serious stories to cover, but he said Broad Street.
Broad Street, Bond Street, who cares? It's Saturday night. The guy is dead. And I say, let's celebrate.
And just think of it. Being stabbed with the weapon he was bringing back. Well, it must have been someone he knew, otherwise how could they have gotten the dagger from him? Could have been anyone at the station.
Any one of us who were out that night. But the coroner's report hasn't been released yet, so maybe there's still something we don't know. But at least we know that one of us didn't do it.
You know, I'm not at all upset that Jim's dead. I never really liked him anyway.
Well, that's good to hear.
I feel relieved. Isn't that terrible? You're supposed to feel sad when someone you know dies, and I feel relieved. I must be a terrible person.
No. It makes perfect sense. You're in love with me. You didn't want to have to hurt his feelings by telling him, and you're relieved that he's dead. So now you won't have to.
You really are the most conceited man. Had nothing to do with you. The only reason I ever went out with him is because he forced me to.
Oh, Beryl, please. How?
He was blackmailing me. When I was young, about 20, I did something stupid. I posed for some photographs. I was trying to break into the business, and I was young and naive, and I thought it would help. Well, that's what the photographer said. Sleazebag. Anyway, I forgot all about it, but somehow Jim got a hold of the negatives. He was blackmailing me. Said if I didn't go out with him, he'd make sure they got into one of the local papers. It would have ruined me. It would have ruined us. I couldn't let him do it, so I had to do it, he said. But I never wanted him dead. Maimed, maybe, but not dead.
Stand by. Camera one, let's go to a two-shot. Let us pray. Let's count it down. 5, 4, 3, 2.
Good evening, this is Beryl Blackwood.
And I'm Dennis Oliver.
Police today revealed information about the weapon used to kill Geraldine Tracy and WDOA reporter James Johnson. While the wound in both cases was consistent with a small dagger, in fact, the weapon was an exotic Oriental woman's hairpin.
Police discovered the pin in the phone booth next to Johnson's body. The murderer apparently dropped it in his hurry to escape. Before being killed, Johnson had told WDOA station manager William Hemingway that he believed the pin had been bought in a shop on Bond Street. I went to Araby's on Bond Street, where the owner told us about the pin.
Yes, my friend. I remember it quite distinctly. A long metal pin with a head of jade, green jade, very handsomely carved. A design of delicately interlaced fish representing a river god. A wound from such a pin would be quite distinct.
Is it unique?
In this country, perhaps. But they are common enough in the province from which they come. The women there wear them pinned in their hair. 2, as a rule. The river god, to ensure fertility and long life. The snake goddess, representing immortality.
Well, the river god doesn't seem to have been working this time. Can you describe the person who bought the pin?
I can give you his name. He left this card. Henry Fisher, a jeweler in the Dedham firm of Fisher and Flensburger.
Police immediately went to the home of Fisher to question him about the pin. After first denying it, he later admitted having bought it as a present for Geraldine Tracy. He continues to deny, however, that he had anything to do with her murder. Police have advised him not to leave the area. Beryl?
There was a blessed event at the zoo today as Pei Ping gave birth to triplets.
It's obvious. Fisher killed her.
All it means is that Fisher bought the pin. Anyone could have come to her house, picked it up, and stabbed her with it.
Anyone could have, but Fisher did. Now, you don't forget, I used to be a reporter, too. You know, I've got a nose for this sort of thing.
Well, at least it's good you can use that thing for something. Look, I am too, and I've met Fisher. And I don't think he's the kind who could do in a girlfriend.
Anyone can if he gets angry enough. Look, Tracy puts this woman up in this house, right? But doesn't pay enough attention to her. So she takes up with this guy, Fishy Fisher. Happens all the time. She tells Fisher she'll dump Tracy. She doesn't. They fight. Fisher gets angry and picks up the present that he bought her out of love and kills her.
Does your wife know your mind works like that? Now listen, this is far more likely. Tracy is having a romance. She's very young, and he thinks he's in love. She's expecting a condo on the waterfront. Tracy puts her up in a rented A-frame in Dedham. One day, Tracy stops by. He sees the pin. Well, he knows he didn't buy it, and it's too expensive for her to have bought. So, they argue. She tells him she has someone else. Tracy gets furious and kills her with her other boyfriend's present.
You're really fishing with that one. I mean, that makes about as much sense as when the police came here asking us what we were doing the night Johnson was killed. As if I would kill one of my own reporters.
Oh, I think you might. Well, if it would help ratings. So what'd they find out anyway? Well, I think the police are overlooking a lot of potential suspects.
Like that maid, Gladys Sharp. And Mr. Tracy.
Oh.
Come on. There's a suspicious guy if I ever heard of one.
Tracy? No way could he have done it.
Well, turn off the teleprompter and your brain goes dead, too. There's absolutely no evidence tying him to it.
No evidence. No evidence. A guy disappears on the day his, quote, wife, unquote, is murdered. And doesn't even show up at the funeral? Sounds a little funny to me.
No, he's probably seeing her on the side. He's married. He doesn't want to get involved. I mean, that's not so suspicious.
Or there could be two murderers.
I agree with your theory. Let's concentrate on Fisher. That's our man.
Come in.
Here it is. The police just dropped it by.
What is it?
Johnson was carrying it with him the night he was killed. The police impounded it and just releasing it to us now. Only a week late.
It's his last tape. This is the report he was working on that day. Let's see what's on it.
All right, let's start. My investigations into the drug trade in Dedham. It seems that there's a local jeweler involved. Now, I don't know how the drugs are getting in. By boat? Maybe. But they get to him. I'm sure this guy's a big dealer. I've been observing his store, and I've seen one woman in particular going in and out several times. She's middle-aged, brown hair, slightly overweight, kind of a dumpy dresser. And she's usually carrying 2 or 3 video cassettes, which is kind of odd. Now, I followed her, and I think she takes the drugs and makes deliveries. Maybe the drugs are in the video cassette boxes. But I don't have evidence of that. We have to be careful. And we have to find out how the drugs are getting in here in the first place. Let's cut this and go do the stand-up. Okay, we're rolling. This is Jimmy Johnson of the WDOA News Crime Busters team. I'm standing in front of the firm of Fisher and Flensburger, a respected jewelry establishment in the area. The Crime Busters have learned, however, that this store is also doubling as the front of a major drug operation in the New Northeast. Wait, I blew it. Let's do it again.
Wow. Good evening. Police investigations today continued into the stabbing death of Geraldine Potts. Police have found no evidence to suggest she was actually married and have begun to refer to the victim by her maiden name.
While her boyfriend, Henry Fisher, remains a key suspect in the absence of any alibi whatsoever, police are also looking into the activities that night of her maid, Gladys Sharp, and her sister, Angela Potts, the stewardess who was arrested last week on drug smuggling and possession charges. I talked with Sharp shortly after the murder, but Sharp agreed today to be interviewed again by WDOA anchorwoman Beryl Blackwood.
She was a pill. Really. If I wasn't working for her, I wouldn't have given her the time of day.
What happened that day?
The day she was killed? I don't know. I cleaned up the place. Made it really spotless. Not a single dirty dish, nothing. Because she said Mr. Tracy was coming for the weekend. But I knew better.
What do you mean?
She never would have done that for Tracy. Mr. Fisher was coming over. That's why things had to be so nice. A maid knows.
But Tracy did come by that night.
Well, that's what the police say. I'm sure she wasn't too happy to see him if he did. You sure you don't want one of these? They're really delicious.
No, I'm on a diet.
Well, thanks for buying it. It's really good.
What did you do that night?
I went out to the video store and rented Gone with the Wind. I love that film.
What was your involvement with Henry Fisher?
Well, there's a man I wouldn't mind having an involvement with. It was nothing like that, unfortunately. No, I got to know him when he used to come over to visit Mrs. Tracy. She wasn't nearly good enough for him. He was a wonderful man.
Anything more?
No. Too bad.
I also talked to Mrs. Walter Catsby, who employed Sharp before she worked for Geraldine Potts.
Dangerous. She's dangerous, unreliable, and she talks. And if you check into her background, you'll find things. I can't say, but I decided I just couldn't trust her. Things started happening. Things were missing. I've seen her walking with some very strange men. It doesn't surprise me to see her in the center of this. I make it a custom never to keep a maid for very long anyway. Prevents personal entanglements and avoids a lot of problems. And every time I'd come downstairs, she was always watching some stupid videotape.
Police have also been questioning Geraldine Potts' sister, Angela, who is currently in jail pending bail on drug possession charges.
Police claim Angela Potts was the courier for a major drug operation in the New England area. They believe Geraldine found out about her involvement and didn't approve. And they allege that the two sisters had an argument about it earlier on the night Geraldine Potts was murdered.
I looked into that, Dennis. Angela Potts is being held pending posting of a $1 million bail in Suffolk Maximum Security Prison. WDOA News tried for over a week to get permission to interview her, and we were finally successful.
You have to believe one thing. I loved my sister. I was very upset to hear that she'd been murdered.
Neighbors said they heard two women arguing that evening.
Did they say that? You didn't know?
It was reported on the news and in the papers.
Yeah, well, I don't follow the antics of the penny press or watch TV. The only reason I'm talking to you is to clear my name. But yes, we were arguing. Because Geraldine was trying to move in on my boyfriend, and I told her to stop. You see, she was always the popular one when we were kids. Anytime a boy got interested in me, she'd start to flirt with him, and then she'd just steal him away, and then she'd dump him. You know, Miss Blackwood, that's bad enough when you're kids, but it's pretty ridiculous when you're adults.
If you don't mind my asking, what's your boyfriend's name?
His name is Henry Fisher.
WDOA News has checked into the activities of Sharp and Angela Potts that night and has been able to verify the alibi of one of them.
Dennis, why aren't you here yet?
Oh, Mr. Redmond, I'm sorry. I didn't know it was you. How's Mrs. Redmond? Yes. I did tell Mr. Hemingway I had some new information on the case. You see, Jim told me that... Oh, did you hear? His autopsy results were announced today. Anyway, yes. Jim told me that night he thought the pin came from a shop on Broad Street, not Bond Street. I'm working up a report on it, and I want to talk to you and Mr. Hemingway about airing it, possibly Monday. Hello? 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 Dead. Dennis?
Gas! Quick, call an ambulance.
Good evening. There have been some major developments in the investigation into the deaths of Geraldine Potts and WDOA reporter James Johnson. Police in Dedham have been questioning everyone they can about the activities that night of Henry Fisher and the so-called Mr. Tracy.
Both men were at the home of Geraldine Potts that night, and police have learned the following.
Adding to the mystery surrounding this case was the assault Saturday night on WDOA anchorwoman Beryl Blackwood in her apartment. She had just discovered some valuable new evidence in the case, which she will share with us now. Beryl?
I spoke to James Johnson on the night he was killed. I believed at that time, and still do believe, that he said the jade-headed pin was bought in a shop on Broad Street, not Bond Street, as we earlier reported. Consequently, I have talked with the store owners of curio shops on Broad Street, and yesterday discovered that indeed a jade-headed pin was bought in one about a month ago. This is the Bohemian Curios shop. It was here that I talked with Mrs. Ann Arcidi, the keeper of the shop.
Customers. First they want a thing as old as the hills, and then they expect you to give it to them good as new. Or they spend an hour looking at every antique in the shop, and then they pick out a can-gone brooch in the $1 tray and expect me to put a pin on for them. You'd think I kept this shop just to oblige them. I mean, if I said it once, I said it once a day. I'm not in repairs, I am in antiques.
Do you remember selling a jade-headed pin?
Of course I remember it. What do you think I am, senile? I had one with some woman's head on it with the snakes. I had it in the window, and this man saw it.
It was a man.
Well, I'd say so. I mean, that's my best guess anyway. So he comes in and he says, "These are usually found in pairs, and could I find its mate?" "No, I can't," I told him. But he bought it anyway. Oh.
When was this?
About a month ago.
Can you tell me who this man is?
Yes, I think I can. He said his name was Casey or something like that.
Where did that tape come? Who brought in that tape? Stop that tape! Cut it!
Frankly, that's pretty shocking news to those of us at WDOA.
It sure is. I'm Dennis Oliver.
And I'm Beryl Blackwood.
It's amazing, isn't it? The police made their arrests today, and every station in town is covering the story. I'm just the weatherman, and I never suspected who killed Geraldine Potts and Jim Johnson, and who assaulted Beryl. But I'd say there's a better than 50% probability that you figured it out. Did you?